Today we look at 2 ways of characterizing your villains. Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to The Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Now, we're going to keep going on here with talking about villains and how you use them in your story, and specifically we want to look at characterizing your villains, because, well, given that the villains are a means to an end, that's the purpose they serve in the story, they're the ultimate test for your player characters, you want them to have a certain amount of characterization, and I mentioned that they have a reason for why they do things. Having that reason helps to tell you a lot about those villains. Now, having a villain that has something to say for themselves, why they do what they do, and how they go about everything, does a lot to really make them feel like real characters. And that's important because if they represent something of which that the players are opposed to, that makes the challenge between them much more meaningful. It's not just a fight between two people or, two groups of people. It's a fight between two fundamentally opposed ideologies at that point, which really helps to draw in your players and get them invested. Alternatively, another way you can go about characterizing your villains is just by making them horrible and monstrous. Something that's more just a direct threat to the players, maybe everything that they represent, or everyone that they know and love and care about, but there's not really much to them beyond just the maliciousness, the vileness, how awful and destructive they are, and they may not even be malicious about it, they just may be. That just may be how they go about things, and we'll give examples of both here as we go along. But let's start with characterizing a villain that has something to say for itself. Now, these kinds of villains, I think, are overall much more interesting. It's not to say that a less motivationally thought out villain isn't interesting. It's just interesting in a different way. But someone that has a fully fledged and thought out philosophy, ideals, and motivations poses quite a few interesting questions and unique challenges towards the players. Now, I'd mentioned before Caesar from Caesar's Legion in Fallout New Vegas. What makes him interesting is that he maintains that the way he goes about things, imitating the Roman Empire, is the best way to go about surviving and rebuilding in the wasteland in the aftermath of nuclear Armageddon. And he's got some points. I mentioned before he makes some very valid and critical of arguments against what the NCR is doing, the New California Republic. He points out that the New California Republic had thrived when Tandy was president and maintained her presidency for 50 years and essentially had nobody that was willing to go against her, nobody willing to challenge her, and they thrived and did well. And after she died, well, the nature of republic politics, representative democracy, means that there are different groups and factions that formed in the aftermath. 1 or 2, maybe 3 parties that had political control and dominion and are vying against one another rather than trying to maintain and govern their democracy. And not only that, but there were major business influences that were also draining away resources from the overall needs of the Republic. That's why the fight in Nevada is going badly. Around New Vegas is going so badly against the Legion. They're drawing away necessary troops and resources from fighting the Legion. Caesar points at that and goes, if they were to actually get their act together and commit their full strength against us, they wouldn't really be able to stop us. But because they cannot, they are therefore weaker than us, and they will just ultimately end up being consumed by the Legion. I don't do this out of malice. This is just Hegelian dialectics. These two things will come into conflict, and one will transform in the face of the other. And that's interesting. He doesn't say he claims it's not malicious, but the way they go about things is utterly terrifying. And true to their historical forebears, they go about things in a very awful way. They do create peace, but the way they create peace is by leaving very few left behind in order to be disruptive. And the Romans, from a historical standpoint, they believed that they were peace givers. They believed that they brought peace, civilization, and justice to the world that they conquered. But their opponents, their neighbors that were conquered, enslaved, and brought under their dominion, might have disagreed with them. And you take a look at what they did in the British Isles to the Britons there. And to Boudica, oh my God, that's an awful, horrible account. Mass slaughter, mass rape, and pillaging and burning of villages. And that set the Britons against them. And of course, that just opened up greater excuse for the Romans to enact violence against them. Or Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, like historical Caesar's campaigns in Gaul. The way he went about everything, it made it very apparent to the Gallic tribes that annexation was in their near future. Their only problem is that the tribes couldn't get united and get their act together and act in a fully unified opposition against them until towards the end, when the remaining tribes unified under Vercingetorix and went against Caesar. It's kind of funny how history kind of ends up repeating itself there, and that's what's happening there. But the point is, Caesar has a reasoning and basis for why he's doing all of this. He's drawing from historical inspiration because he's a reasonably intelligent and well-educated man. And his methods do produce a certain kind of peace and stability, to the point that characters that are only loosely affiliated with the Legion, different merchants and traders, will comment that they enjoy trading in Legion territory because there's no gangs, there's no raiders, they don't face any threat as long as they abide by the Legion's laws and rules. Whereas when the merchants in NCR territory, they have to worry about the powder gangers, they have to worry about the various raider tribes, they have to worry about the great khans, they also have to worry about the different businesses that are operating in very cutthroat manner, like the Van Graffs, who are just wiping out their competition, their legal competition at that. And then you also have other merchant companies that are wanting to undercut the competition by hiring the player character to go through into, say, the gun runners and steal their schematics for producing firearms. That's some pretty underhanded stuff. And also, not only are these missions that you can undertake within the game, but that's a pretty salient criticism overall of the NCR, that this is happening within their territory and they have little to no ability to police it. You have about 5 or 6 different raider gangs just right around Vegas. There's the Khans still around inside Vegas territory. There's these businesses doing all these brutal, bloody things within their territory. And not only that, but the Legion's able to reach out past the lines of battle and attack you if you're in opposition to the Legion. They raid the different NCR forts back behind those lines. And it just goes to show how little the NCR is able to really stop them. And so, that all comes together to form a pretty salient criticism of the NCR and the way they go about things. It makes the Legion have a very strong position in their reasoning, and it's a fully fleshed out ideology that you have to go up against. Whereas conversely, if we take a look at the other way you can characterize the villains that you throw at the players, you do not setting them within, not giving them a larger philosophical bent. Think about Darth Vader from the original Star Wars trilogy. The prequels do more to flesh him out, so do the extended universe materials. But in the original trilogy, what do we really get to know about Darth Vader? I mean, he's leading, stormtroopers. He's a powerful figure within the Empire. He stands by and watches casually, idly, as an entire planet is annihilated. He sits there and watches an act of casual genocide just to test out this space station. He tortures a main character. He strikes down this wise elderly figure that's training the protagonist. He's a brutal, awful, terrifying man. And that's really all the characterization we need about him, though. That's all we need to know. We watch him do these awful things, essentially helping to lead space Nazis to victory. That's all we need to know about him, to know that he needs to be stopped and go down, that the Empire needs to be stopped and go down. And we only learn a little bit more about him as time goes on. He killed Anakin. Oh wait, no, turns out he is Anakin. He's Luke Skywalker's father. And he bows to this man called the Emperor. He bows to the Emperor, and it's like this awful, horrible, terrifying, brutal figure bows down and calls another person master. It's like, how terrifying is the Emperor if this is his right-hand man? And that in turn characterizes the Emperor. The Emperor is characterized by the Empire as a whole, all these other characters we've seen. But that characterization is still relatively minimal. We don't really need to know much about them other than the fact that they are evil, they need to be stopped, and they very much present an absolute existential threat. And because they're a recurring threat over the course of 3 movies, we get really invested in stopping them. We don't really need to know much more about that beyond them, but it's still such a compelling story, and you can do that for your players. Another example of this is Fire Lord Ozai from the Avatar: The Last Airbender series. Ozai is characterized very much by the Fire Nation soldiers we see throughout the series, through figures like Commander Zhao, or his daughter Azula, or the scar that he left on his son Zuko. All of those things paint a very vivid picture of the man. Even though we don't really learn much about him personally, he is still reflected in the actions of his troops and these other characters. And it does very little to dissuade us, very little can dissuade us from the notion that he needs to be stopped. So, these are the 2 ways you can go about characterizing your villains, either through fleshing out their philosophy, giving them a grounded, set, rational reason for why they're acting the way they act and what they represent within the setting, or by just demonstrating how god-awful, powerful, and evil they are, demonstrating that repeatedly and having them clash regularly with the players. And in doing so, you can create compelling villains. Personally, I like villains of a more philosophical bent, but existential threats are fun as well. But that'll be all for now. We'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Hit that like or dislike button. Let me know if I've missed the plot entirely or if I've hit my mark yet again. And if you haven't done so already, go on down there and hit the subscribe button and become a regular member here at the Gamers Den. But with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.